starting a new series today, and we're going to be in the book of Hebrews. If you need a Bible, raise your hands and we'll get you one. Otherwise, you can flip open to Hebrews chapter 11 would be the best place to be. The book of Hebrews is a pretty interesting book, and I would challenge you over the next couple of weeks. I'll just be honest. We're going to be in this series for like 9 or 10 weeks. So, I know, hang on, right? I would encourage you, if you could, sit down, read through the entire book of Hebrews, front to back, first chapter to last chapter, every verse in between, and let's all be on the same page as far as what this theme is all about. And so we're starting today a new series based on Hebrews chapter 11, and what we have in Hebrews chapter 11 are these examples of people, particularly from the Old Testament, who are examples of faith. And so that's where we're going to be looking. We're going to look at a different example of faith each week. But today's just kind of a general overview. The book of Hebrews was written to a group of people, likely a church, and they were facing all sorts of issues. They were facing pain, hurt, they were confused, they were in the middle of tribulation, they had some pride stuff going on, and they really just needed some encouragement. That's what they needed. And so the big theme of Hebrews is this. If you've heard about Jesus, if you've heard about the gospel of Jesus, if you know the gospel, if you know the message of Jesus, and now you're experiencing hurt, you're experiencing pain and confusion and trials and persecution like the church was, then the message is this: don't stop. Don't give up. Keep fighting and keep the faith. And that's the big message. And remember a couple weeks ago we talked about the book of Romans and how there was a significant shift about chapter 12 in the book of Romans. Well, it's the same thing with the book of Hebrews. The author starts describing who Jesus is, the gospel. He's comparing the old covenant to the new covenant. He's given us all this information about who Jesus is, what God is like, and what Jesus is like, and what they came to earth to do. And then about chapter 10, he begins to shift. He starts to kind of call us out on what he's just talked about. And in chapter 11, he gives us this list of examples. And then in chapter 12, he says, if you believe all of this stuff, then this is what it should do in your life. And so that's what happens with Hebrews. And we see that. And so the author ends chapter 10. It's important for us to jump back to chapter 10, knowing that this group of people, this particular church that the book is written to, they're facing all sorts of massacre of every kind. They really are. The book is written in the height of Nero's Nero's reign, who loved to persecute Christians. And so listen to this, verse 39. He's telling them about Jesus. He's talking about keeping the faith. But we are not of those who shrink back and are destroyed, but of those who have faith and preserve their souls. This is the point about faith. Faith preserves us. Faith especially preserves us in the midst of pressure, of trial and difficulty and pain and hurt and sorrow. The opposite of faith is to shrink back. The opposite of faith is to retreat or wander and be confused and get lost. The opposite of faith is to get distracted. Have you ever drifted? Have you ever experienced pain? How many of you know hurt? Have you felt like you've ever been persecuted or pressured? Or have you ever faced any difficult times in your life? See, this book is written to some of those people, but it's also written to the people who think they've kind of arrived in their faith. You know, I've done enough. I've got faith, and so that should be enough. There's a pride issue going on, and so the author's addressing that. There's also the group of people who make excuses. Excuses like, well, God can never love me because, well, look at me. Look what I did. God could never possibly forgive me for these things. And so throughout this book, we have these concepts. How many of you have ever been pierced, really pierced, by the truth of what Jesus has done for us? How many of you have rejected that and pushed that away and said, you know what, I don't want anything to do with it? And see, no matter what circumstance we're in, the message of Hebrews is the same. And the author's saying this: stay close to Jesus. No matter what, stay close to Jesus. You have confidence in Jesus, yet some of you, he tells them, you're losing your faith. Do you know anybody who was strong? They seemed faithful, and at some point they turned away. Maybe the hurt got too much. The pain got too much. The excuses dominated their thinking. The pride became too big. But do you know people who were walking with God? Walking with Jesus, had faith in Jesus, and at some point decided, I'm done with that. And you know, too often people who lose faith, it's connected to another loss. We lose faith when we lose something. We lose faith in God when we lose a spouse. We lose faith in God when we lose a child, or a job, or a house, or a friendship. Have you ever noticed people who walk away and lose their faith often lose it when it's connected to another loss in their life? So Hebrews 11 is written to encourage, it's written to deepen, it's written to strengthen our confidence in God's promises. And through chapter 10, the author is telling us all about the truth of Jesus. And then he moves on to this great definition of faith and then gives us some examples of these characters. Look at verse 11, or chapter 1, verse, I'll get that out. Chapter 11, verse 1, all right? It says this. Greatest definition of faith you'll find. Now faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. And so right off the bat, the author tells us this is what faith is. And then he's going to give us some examples of who these people are. Jump down to verse 6. As he tells us, he says, without faith, it is impossible to please him, God, for whoever would draw near to God must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who seek them. And yet again, the author will go on, verse 7 and following, and giving some more examples of what this looks like. But then look at verse 13. In the midst of their faith, in the midst of having and possessing faith, listen to what happened. These all died in faith, not having received the things promised, but having seen them and greeted them from afar, and having acknowledged that they were strangers and exiles on the earth. This is what's happening. These guys are all characters of faith. They're all examples of faith. Yet the reason they're examples of faith is because they didn't get necessarily what they had hoped for. They didn't get what was promised. They got to look at it from a distance. But did you catch it? They understood that this also wasn't their home. Verse 14, for people who speak thus make it clear that they are seeking a homeland. If they had been thinking of that land from which they had gone out, they would have had opportunity to return. But as it is, they desire a better country, that is a heavenly one. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared for them a city. And so the author goes in and he gives us even more examples. And catch this and look what faith actually costs. Verse 32. The author says, what more shall I say? For time would fail me to tell of Gideon and Barak and Samson and Jephthah and David and Samuel and the prophets, who through faith they conquered kingdoms, enforced justice, obtained promises, stopped the mouths of lions, quenched the power of fire, escaped the edge of the sword, and were made strong out of weakness, became mighty in war, put foreign armies to fight. Women received back their dead by resurrection. Some were tortured, refusing to accept release, so that they might rise again to a better life. Others suffered mocking and flogging, and even chains and imprisonment. They were stoned. They were sawn in two. They were killed with the sword. They were about in skins and sheep and goats, destitute, afflicted, mistreated, of whom the world was not worthy, wandering about in deserts and mountains and the dens and caves of the earth. Almost makes you not want to have faith, right? In verse 39, and all these, though commended through their faith, did not receive what was promised, since God had provided something better for us, that apart from us, they should not be made perfect. And then this is the catch. You got to go to chapter 12. Therefore, those of you who are doubting your faith, who are struggling in your faith, those of you who have hurts and pains and excuses and pride, therefore, since we are surrounded by a great cloud of witnesses, Let us lay aside every weight and every sin which clings so closely, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God. Do you catch it? You're struggling, you're hurting, you're in the midst of pain. Maybe you got pride, maybe you've got a list of excuses, maybe you've experienced deep loss. The author is saying, don't give in, don't give up, keep running, keep going, don't lose faith, keep the fight. Because you have people who have set the example before. Don't give in, don't give up. Man, are you struggling? Are you struggling? Are you hurting? Are you in the midst of pain? The next several weeks, we're going to be looking at these faith heroes, and we're going to see how they did it. We're going to ask questions, and we're going to attempt to answer them. We're going to ask questions like, what is faith? What is faith? What is faith made of? What is the purpose of faith anyway? And how do you know if you even have faith? What does faith do? What does it accomplish? Who or what is the center of your faith? Where does faith come from? What destroys faith? And what's the reward for this faith thing anyway? Well, we can't possibly answer all of them today, but as we look at these different characters, at these different people that were examples of faith, these are the questions we want to ask. And this would be my prayer for you. My prayer for you would be that you would be humble, and that God would make us hungry and thirsty for His Word, and that God would help encourage us persevere through the hard times, the hurts, the pains, the disappointments, the sin, that God would remind us that we have plenty of room to grow. Because here's the problem. Our culture has messed up the word faith. They really have. They've destroyed the word faith, they've demoted it, and they've hijacked the word. Our culture associates the word faith with weakness. They assume that those who have faith, they're ignorant. And they must have checked out their brains or left their eyes, and they ignore evidence, and so they close their eyes and their ears and they take blind leaps of faith. But here's the deal. That's not the biblical faith that we read about. Faith does not mean that you check your head in at the door before you come in. Faith is not a blind leap, and we'll see that this is true as we look and work through Hebrews chapter 11. So what's the first question today? What is faith? That's the first question we need to answer. What is faith? Hebrews 11:1 tells us that faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. Simply put, this is what faith is. Faith is trust. Faith is trust. Faith is trusting in the evidence that you can't see right in front of you. Faith is making a decision without demanding or requiring some sort of proof before you act on it. Now, before you judge and you think there's no way I can have faith, all of you are using faith right now. Do you know that? Most of you, now there's some strange oddballs in the room, but most of you didn't come into the room and take the chair apart and look at it and inspect it and make sure that the welds were still tight and the screws were still tight. You didn't come and ask any of us that I know of who the fabricator or the engineer who actually designed the chair was, where it was built and how long it took to build and how old are the chairs. Instead, you came right in and what'd you do? You trusted, which is faith, your chair. How many of you have ever flown on an airplane? Yeah. Interesting, isn't it? Most of you, unless you're odd, most of you don't walk down the jetway and the pilot's standing there saying, hey, good morning to everybody, pull out your personal breath analyzer and say, could you blow into this just so I can check and see where you're at? Oh, and by the way, could I see your credentials? Where did you learn to fly? How long have you flown? And how old is this plane anyway? Oh, and can I please see if the oil's been checked, the tire pressure and the engines are running? Because for all we know, is somebody could have been working at it, they're mad at their boss and they sabotage the plane. And so all that happens, and then what do? You go and sit down in a chair, again, that you didn't fabricate, you didn't design, you don't know where it came from. You buckle yourself to that chair, and it happens to be bolted down to what? 300,000 pounds of metal that's going to fly in the air with 6,000 pounds of fuel. What's the joke? Built together and pieced together and screwed together by the lowest bidder. We use faith every day. We use faith every day. You set your alarm clock at night and you put faith in this object that's supposed to go off, which drives me crazy because the alarm clock doesn't go off, it actually goes on, but we say it goes off. That's a whole other topic. We drive on parkways and park on driveways, and anyway, you see how I just went. But we put our faith in this object. I mean, all of us do it. All of us have faith. All of us practice faith. All of us do. Faith is putting your trust in something, and there are steps in developing our faith. The first step is you got to gather. And what do you have to gather? Well, we read, we listen, we watch, and we gather information. We gain knowledge about something in a particular area. And so as we're gathering and gathering and gathering, by the way, when it comes to God, God has given us an incredible tool called the Bible. And the Bible will tell us who He is and what He is like. And this is where so much of our knowledge comes from. It's full of information. It's full of knowledge. But we gather this information, and then once we gather the information, we have to process this information. We process it. You gather it, you process it, you work through it. And then after you've gathered and after you've processed, then what do? You have to make a decision based on the information you have. Are you going to accept it and receive it? Are you going to reject it or deny it? What are you going to do in this process of faith development? And finally, once you decide, you got to trust. It's called faith. You got to trust. This happens, let's say I'm sitting down having coffee with a group of people and I've got this health concern, and so I say to my friends, well, who are your doctors? Do you have a doctor that you'd recommend? One person sits and says, you know what, I love my doctor, but I wouldn't recommend them. They always seem to be in a hurry and always seem like they're always, got to move on to the next patient. The next person I talk to, I love my doctor's great. They listen and they're really, patient and kind, but they're getting ready to retire. Another person says, I love my doctor, they're really good listeners. So I'm gathering this information, you see. Then I have to process this information, and then I have to make a decision. Which doctor would I like to have as my doctor? And then after all of that, I have to trust. I have to act on it. And so I call and make an appointment. And so faith is trust, but faith is also action. Once we have this decision, and once we have this trust, then we act on it. And all of us do this on a regular basis. Romans 10:17 says this. So faith comes from hearing, and hearing through the word of Christ. Can I just take a side note real quick and tell you this? Most of the time, our resistance to faith has nothing to do with science or academics. Now, that's where we like to argue. That's where we like to debate. That's where the world says, well, you can't prove it. It's not scientific. It's not academic. And so you can't. But this is my point. Most of the time when we actually have discussions about faith, people who want to reject faith and blame it on science and want to blame it on academics, it's usually not the case. It's usually a moral issue. Faith calls us to action. And sometimes our resistance to faith has nothing to do with science or academics. It's moral because we like our sin too much. We just do. We like our sin too much. We don't like the idea of someone else telling us how we should be, how we should live. And so as we talk about faith, understand that as you're dealing with resistance, often it has nothing to do with science, it has nothing to do with academics. It has more to do with morality and that issue. What's the purpose of faith? Clearly stated is this. The purpose of faith is salvation. It is impossible to come to God without faith. Impossible. You cannot do it. Romans 5, 1 through 2, Floyd, I'm skipping a couple, but Romans 5, 1 through 2 says, therefore, since we have been justified by faith, we have peace with God through our Lord Jesus Christ. Through Him, we have also obtained access by faith into this grace in which we stand, and we rejoice in the hope of the glory of God. This is crucial. It's absolutely important. Because without faith, it's impossible to know God, to be in a relationship with God. We have all sinned. We've all fallen short, Romans 3 says. And so we have to have this faith. Ephesians chapter 2, we've read it literally the last 3 weeks. For it is by grace that you have been saved. You've been saved through faith. Isn't that a beautiful picture? This is not of your own doing. Paul says it is the gift of God, not a result of works, so that no one may boast. Now don't forget what I said. Faith is trust, but faith is also action. And when it comes to being saved, faith is all over the place. Why? Because we must realize that we are one piece of God's forever timeline. We fit on this forever timeline, and God looks at us and God invites us. He says, would you believe in me? And the reason He asked that question is because He's saying to you, I believe in you so much that I sent my Son, Jesus Christ, to die on the cross, knowing full well that some of you will put your trust in me and some of you will put your trust in something else. He wants you to believe in Him. He wants you to trust Him. He wants you to have that faith. It is impossible for us to come to God without faith. The whole story of the Bible is about God pursuing us. He's chasing after us. God wants you to know Him, and He wants to know you, and that comes through faith. Faith is putting your trust in Him. And if you don't trust Him, then you're not coming. That's just how it goes. I mean, picture this. I could say to my wife, Sarah, almost 11 years ago, I got down on one knee and I said, would you marry me? But I just can't trust you. Ever. But I sure would like to be married to you. How's that going to work? Or I say to Alan, will you be my best friend, please? But I can't trust you. For the life of me, I can't trust you, but I'm looking for a best friend. Would you be my best friend? Or I think, you know what? Hey, Terry, I'd like to go in business with you. Can we go to business together? I'll invest some money. You invest some money. We'll go to business together. But I just can't trust you, man. I don't trust you. How does that... Thank you. How does that work? You see it? Because sometimes when it comes to this concept, people say, well, how dare God demand that I put my trust in Him? Well, if you want a healthy, good marriage, you've got to trust each other. If you want to have a good friendship, there's got to be trust. There's got to be faith. And there's got to be action. If you're going to have a good friendship, if you're a good business, if you're going to have these things, it takes trust and it takes action on that trust, does it not? And so that's what Jesus is saying. That's what the writer of Hebrews is saying. Put your faith in something. Put your faith, your trust into something. I love this verse and I hate this verse all at the same time. It's Romans 14:23. It says this. For whatever does not proceed from faith is what? Man, we want to make sin about the rules, the regulations. We want to talk about all day long the 10 Commandments and breaking these rules. And then Paul writes this verse. Thanks, Paul, a lot for messing up my life. Whatever does not proceed from faith is sin. Basically, sin is not just the wrong things you do. It's not. Sin is everything that exists outside of us trusting God. That's what it is. And so it moves us to the next question. Who is the center of faith? Anything that exists outside of putting your trust in God is what? Sin. And if you're not trusting God, then who or what are you trusting? I mean, that's the question. Because you're either trusting God, and I submit you're either trusting God or you're trusting in yourself. The number one religion in the world is not Christianity. The number one religion in the world is not Islam. It's not Mormonism. It's not a lot of things. You know what the number one religion in the world is? It's called secular humanism. That's what it's called. Secular humanism means basically you're too smart for God. That God doesn't know better for you. That you're too smart for God and that you want to be your own God and that you know better than anybody else. So why in the world would you trust? Why would you put your faith into anything or anyone? Here's the thing. Faith is the one attitude of the heart that is the exact opposite of trusting in yourself. I mean, it just is. And the only difference between a Christian and a non-Christian is not whether or not you have faith, but what you put your faith in. If we all have faith, we all use faith, then what is the object of your faith? What are you putting your faith in? What are you putting your trust in? That's the question. What destroys faith? That's the next question. Hurt and pain. Hurt and pain. Some of you have experienced hurt and pain at a depth that some of us will never understand. And it's possible as you've experienced this hurt and you've experienced this pain that you feel like you've been betrayed. And you wonder if you'll ever be able to trust anything or anyone again. And so that experience breaks down our faith. Some of you have experienced loss. You've experienced loss of a job, loss of a marriage, loss of a child, loss of a house. And you wonder, God, where have you been anyway? I mean, if I don't feel like you're near, then how in the world can I ever put my trust in you? What else destroys faith? Pride. Pride destroys faith. There are some of you who are filled with pride. Maybe you've been a Christian for 10, 20, 30 years and you think, you know what, Tom, you can't tell me anything I've not heard before. You can't tell me anything I don't know. And man, when we build up that kind of pride when it comes to our faith, we get hardened. And everything just becomes superficial to us. And God never intended it to be that way. Others of you, you know what kills your faith? Excuses. My wife and I, we have this debate over the dishwasher all the time. We do. I'm the guy who thinks you should clean the plates before you put them in the dishwasher. Who's with me? Amen? Come on. Yeah. Now who's with my wife and says, that's what the dishwasher's for? Okay. So about half and half, all right? Man. But here's the reality. My dishwasher theology is terrible God theology. Because sometimes we think we got to clean the plate before we can get in the dishwasher. And God says, hold on, I am the dishwasher. How about you just get in and let me take care of the cleaning? You know? But I'm of the mindset you got to clean it first. And there's so many of you, you're filled with excuses that way. And you're thinking, I'm just too dirty. I'm not clean enough to come to God. And God's saying, you don't have to be. I'm the dishwasher. Let me clean you. Stop making excuses. He's big enough and He's capable to deal with your excuses. He really is. He really is. So you know what I want today? This is what I want. Just to be as clear as I can be, I want some of you today to throw up your hands and I want you to say, God, I can't do it anymore. That's faith. That's faith. I don't know what you're going through. I don't know what you're in the middle of. But man, I want you to find faith today and I want you to throw your hands up and I want you to say, God, I can't do it anymore. That's what faith is all about. That's trust. And that trust leads to action, and it's not blind, it's not stupid, it's not ignorant. It's placing the object of your faith on something that can be trusted. He's shown it. And we're going to look at these characters that He proved it to. Man, some of you today, you need to throw up your hands. You need to say, God, I can't do it anymore. Some of you, you need to humble yourselves. You need to have a broken heart before God, and you need to ask Him, God, I need faith. I need faith. I don't want to be complacent. I want it to be a gift given by You, because that's the only way you'll find faith. For some of you, I want you so badly to be hungry and thirsty for God again. And some of you have just grown weary. I want you to be hungry. I want you to be thirsty for God. I want you to stop drifting. I want you to have a softened heart, and I want you to be renewed and refreshed by God's Spirit, and I want you to remember what faith was like when you first found it. And finally, I want some of you to stop running, to stop turning, to stop doubting, and I want some of you to keep on fighting. And that's the message of this book. Keep fighting. Don't stop. Don't give in. Keep the faith and go for it. Here's the greatest news. The greatest news in the world is this. God sent Jesus. Do you know Him? Have you met Him? And because I think if you would, trust, action, faith would come along. And if you don't know Jesus, I want to introduce you to my friend. I want to talk with you. I want other pastors to talk with you. We got people here who, man, they are capable to tell you, this is who Jesus is. This is what He's like. And you can put your trust in Him. He'll prove it to you. He really will. So where are you at today? Is there anybody in the room today that needs to say, God, I can't do it anymore? Is there anybody in the room who says, you know what, God, I need to find a dose of humility today? I need to remember what it was like to first believe in you, and I need you maybe to soften my heart up a little bit, and I need you to give me a dose of faith. Is there somebody in the room that needs to say, today I need to be hungry and thirsty for you all over again? Or there's some of you who heard the message and you believe it, and you're going to walk out of the room knowing you can't give up, you can't give in, you got to keep the fight.